This is Residence 104.4 FM. Flipping marvellous. It is I, Nicholas F. Hennegan, coming to you once more from a pub. Yes, I know, you're shocked, you're horrified. You can hardly believe it, that I am in a pub in Hammersmith. But this is slightly different because I'm in a pub with Hammersmith. Not to talk about writers, but to talk about actors. And in fact, to talk about, I suppose we are talking about writers really, aren't we? Because we're talking about Mary Shelley. Now, you'll know if you're a regular that I lurch up to the Edinburgh Festival every year. And this year is no exception. And we're doing a production of a play called The Birth of Frankenstein. I normally go, The Birth of Frankenstein, but I don't really need to now because we're into rehearsals. And I've got the cast. Hello, cast!
Hello.
We're in a rehearsal room, which I can't tell you about, obviously. It's secret. But we've got, if you'd like to introduce yourself.
Hello, I'm Callum Pardoe, and I'm playing Lord Byron.
I'm Jamie Patterson, and I am playing Percy Shelley.
And I am Teryn Gray. I'm playing Mary Shelley.
Hooray! I knew that. Of course I knew that. If you're listening, by the way, I should say on 96.4 FM. We're also on bohemianbritain.com. And I'll give you instructions about how you can get in touch later if you'd like. So who wants to start? Tell us about the play. Who wants to tell us about this play? You want to have a go, Carl?
Well, sure.
You're the nearest to me.
Yeah. So I suppose The Birth of Frankenstein is a look at how Frankenstein, the story, came to be following the story of Mary Shelley's life from her birth to the death of her mother, leading into how she met Percy, and then eventually ending up in Geneva with Lord Byron, and sort of having that nightmare of Frankenstein and how that became the story itself. Yes, so that's sort of how I'd sum it up, I suppose. Yeah.
And are you a Shelley fan? Did you know much about Frankenstein before you started this?
Yeah. Well, my first memory of Frankenstein was doing it sort of A levels, and I remember we did a couple of texts at A levels, but Frankenstein was the one that really kind of fascinated me. I love Gothic horror, and I think Frankenstein is such of course, it is the example of it. I think it's a really great text, some really sort of lovely language and imagery in there, and sort of great themes of sort of creation and all sort of lovely gubbins, really. Yeah.
And what part are you playing, Jamie?
So I'm playing Percy Shelley.
Do you know much about Frankenstein before this?
I'd read the book because, well, it was random. I had someone, like a decorator, doing some work on my house, and this was like not so long before this play, and we were just chatting, and he was like, "Have you read Frankenstein?" I was like, "I actually haven't. I've seen the play with Benedict Cumberbatch, but I haven't read the book." And he was like, "You have to read it. It's absolutely amazing." And he lent me the book, and I read it, and I agree. Yeah, it's so ahead of its time, and there's so many themes in it that I think are really prevalent in today, which we've kind of discussed in this process as well. So yeah, thank you to the decorator at my house who got me to read that.
He went, "It's alive!" Yeah. And what about yourself, Teryn? So you're playing Mary Shelley. Did you know much about Frankenstein before this process?
Well, so I've always been sort of tangentially fascinated by Mary Shelley. She's the creator of the genre of sci-fi, essentially. And I'm a big sci-fi fan, and so I've seen many versions of Frankenstein, whether that be play or film or text. And I just, she appears in so many different places in Doctor Who and in all types of sort of adaptations and things. And I think it's really fascinating that the creator of the genre of sci-fi was a teenage girl. And so I've always found her really intriguing as a character. And then through this process, getting to know her a lot deeper, and getting to understand a sense of what inspired her to write Frankenstein and the types of things that had gone on in her life that influenced those types of thoughts of reanimation around death and sort of a new world, are really interesting, because ultimately I think Frankenstein is the story of a parent and a child, and the idea of creation and our children brought into this world of their own accord or not, and what are the implications of that? How much does the parent owe to the child, and vice versa? And Mary herself, having gone through the loss of many children, I think was very, very interesting. So yes, very, very deep, very literary exploration of Mary Shelley and her life. And so that's been the joy to dive into that in this and figure out what all brought about that story, really.
And I suppose it is, because it is quite, I mean, the whole drama of it, you know, she was, 16 years old and she ran away with a married man who was older than her. I mean, you kind of, that's her real life. That's almost like a TV soap plot or something, isn't it? I mean, does anyone think, were they particularly privileged, do you think? I mean, Mary Shelley and her family, because they were, both her parents and her mother they were both sort of great thinkers, weren't they?
Well, it's interesting because they were great thinkers, but at the time Mary runs off with Percy, as I understand it, William Godwin and his new wife, who I believe is also called Claire, they're on hard times and they're sort of struggling financially. In fact, Percy comes into Mary's life because William is on hard times, and Percy reached out and sent him a letter. So I think it's sort of interesting because they're financially not well off, but they're also, you know, I imagine they're not sort of in poverty. You know what I mean? Teryn, I think.
I would say they were by no means destitute. They
Yeah.
were certainly living an upper class lifestyle. I think they were perhaps the poorest of the rich friends, and so it felt like they were really down on their luck. And maybe there were some struggles and some issues with debt and things like that. But I think it was quite still living in upper class society and doing those types of things. They were certainly privileged in many ways.
Yeah, they're able to make their income off of their intellect, which
rather
obviously,
than hard labor.
Yeah, exactly, which most people wouldn't have been able to do at that time. In the play, like Percy, kind of, they're really down on money, and Percy says, "Oh, I'll just send one of my poems in, and I'm sure we can get some money for it," which is obviously like quite a bizarre position to be in. And something. Well, it's a position I quite like to be in myself, to be honest.
I mean, I suppose movie, because this was about the 1700s, early 1800s, wasn't it? I suppose movie forward, you know, Dylan Thomas famously was broke all the time and constantly sort of sofa surfing. Although perhaps Dylan Thomas isn't a good comparison, although we do reference him in the play, do we not?
Yeah.
But of course, I suppose he wasn't. His father was a teacher in Wales, so he didn't have kind of there were no titles, I don't think, in the background. And how do you think you would have liked? Do you think you would have liked your character? Would you like Mary if she was around today?
Yes, yeah. I think she's fascinating. I mean, she was raised sort of this woman out of her time. Her father raised her to be, as he said, a philosopher or even a cynic, and she was raised with an education unlike any other women at that time, being shipped around to various thinkers and writers and academics and learning from all of them. And at the age of 15, everyone was sort of like, oh my God, like this girl is so unusual and so sort of single-minded in her perseverance and everything that she wants to do, you know, had all of these big thoughts and wasn't afraid to share them. And I think that her father and mother's idea of their politics that was passed down to her as well is resulted in why she was so drawn to Percy in his idea of free love and sort of radical thoughts around marriage and things like that. And so I think, and religion, of course. So I think they were very much people out of their time, and I think I would have found her pretty fascinating. Plus, she was a bit morbid, and I love a bit of horror and all of that myself. So.
But if you say she's a bit goth, she kind of invented it, though, didn't she? I suppose.
Yeah.
And what about Percy? How do you relate to Percy Shelley? I mean, is there anything in today that you can see in him?
Yeah, I mean, Percy is this extremely sensitive character who kind of has so much to him. Like, Yeah, I think he's so radical and forward thinking for his time. I think if I met him in the 1800s, I probably would have thought he was a bit of a pretentious idiot, going on to me about this vegetarianism.
Yes, because he was a vegetarian back in the 1800s.
He literally was like the inventor of vegetarianism, and he believed that all creation should be treated as equal. Which, saying that today is great and like really fits in with the values that we hopefully have. But yeah, back in the early 1800s, I'm sure, well, I know that he definitely turned a lot of people's backs up, and I can imagine him kind of walking pretentiously around university trying to lecture people on their eating habits and their lifestyle habits. So yeah, it's interesting to.
And I suppose because famously he got sent down, he got sacked from Oxford, didn't
he? Yeah. So he barely lasted more than a year at Oxford before he released a pamphlet called The Necessity of Atheism, and sent it personally to the church in Oxford and delivered it personally to lots of students, which is quite I mean, he basically asked to be kicked out of the university, which is really, really interesting.
There's a mate of mine went to Oxford and actually had the same rooms that he used to have. That impressed me. I don't know why. And it was a few hundred years later. But and then, of course, Byron. Wow, what can we say about Byron? Did you know much about Byron beforehand?
So bits and bobs, but I think part of the joy of this process has been getting to know Byron the man historically and what he was up to and stuff like that. And I think if I were to meet him today, I think there would be an aspect of admiration for sure, but also I think concern, a lot of sort of concern, because he lived such a reckless kind of life and sort of styled himself as this gentleman, poet, adventurer and stuff like that. And I always get the feeling when I read about Byron that he so desperately, has something to prove and stuff like that. I feel like we rarely hear about the sort of tenderness of Byron, what he was like behind all of the bluster and stuff like that. So that's been something that I've been trying to think about throughout this process. But I think what I'm really fascinated by is his travels and stuff like that, and particularly when it comes to his poetry, he was really influenced by Islam and stuff like that, and the Middle East, where he travelled there a fair bit and stuff like that. And I forget the name of the quote off the top of my head, but he talks about how it's kind of like the font for which like all kind of creativity and poetry in his life kind of stems from, which I think is really, really quite beautiful. So I think. Byron, interesting character,
isn't he? I suppose we're quite privileged in that there's quite a lot written about all of them, isn't there? I mean, that Mary Shelley's letters are there. I'm Nick Hennegan. This is Literary London on Resonance 104.4 FM. I'm talking to the cast of The Birth of Frankenstein, which, in full fairness, I'm also directing. Yeah, come on, of course I'm going to get my microphone out, aren't I? Working with actors. I mean, so let's just talk a little bit about you personally, because I know that there was a great long audition process, and I mean, I guess what started you? Well, it started you, Terry, because obviously you're not of these shores.
What gave it away? Yeah.
I have to say, by the way, your Mary Shelley's perfect. Your RP.
Oh, thank you very much. So I've been in London now for the last 4 years. Originally from California, and spent 7 years in New York. I did my undergrad, my BFA training in acting at NYU Tisch School of the Arts, and then I came over to London to do my master's in classical acting at Lambda. So had some good training over here, so hopefully that's influenced the English accent a bit. Sorry,
I want to say, what made you move to England rather than train in America? Was there a specific thing?
Well, so I trained both places, but in New York it was an incredible training in contemporary and modern work and theater and acting styles. but it was, in my opinion, really, really lacking any sort of foundation on classical acting. And so I thought, well, first off, I was looking just as a way to come over to the UK for a little bit of time. And so I came over and I did a short course at Lambda, did a Shakespeare play over the summer and really enjoyed it, and actually found that I was a bit by the bug a bit. And so did want to come back to do a full master's here. And I thought if I need to get some classical training, I need to come to the place in the world that basically founded it. So that's why I came over here, and Lambda is the oldest drama school in the UK. So that also felt like the place to do it, and sort of the perfect bridge between the training that I had had in New York and the London sort of classical drama school style of training. So yeah, that's what brought me over.
And here you are. Hooray! And what about yourself, James?
So I trained at the Guildford School of Acting. But yes, the kind of path that led me to that, I suppose as a child, I was a very shy child. I'd say I still am quite shy now.
A lot of actors are, I have to say.
Yeah, we are quite introverted people. But yeah, I was extremely shy when I was young. And my parents took me along to some acting classes on the weekend. And it just absolutely transformed me. And yeah, I loved it. I came completely out of my shell. Being on stage, I kind of just, I feel more myself than at any other point in my life.
Even though you're being someone else.
Exactly. It's a weird contradiction, but I guess I feel like I'm able to put a lot of myself into my characters. So it's finding that authenticity, which really interests me now. So yeah, I was fortunate. My parents took me to the theatre a lot when I was younger. And then my dad gave me a book on James Dean when I was about 13. And I just became absolutely obsessed with him. Watched all the films, the 3 limited films that he did before he died, and read that he went and trained at drama school. I just want to do exactly what he did, and that kind of started that journey off for me. And then, here I am. So thanks, James Dean.
Giant. Oh, that was one of his films. What about your training? Have you got sort of showbizy relatives or family?
None. No, not at all. I was the kid who was begging. Unlike you, I was not very shy. I was bursting with stories and songs and things, and always making my parents and siblings and relatives watch me do things. I was obsessed with the film Grease, and walked around pretending to be Sandy all the time, and I would make everyone call me Sandy. But I begged them to put me into theater, dance, anything, basically my whole life, and they never did until I got to high school. So when I was about 13, 14 is the first time that I ever actually did any structured theater, dance, singing. And really it was all downhill from there. My family thought I was going to be a doctor. I was dead set on being a surgeon for a long time. So it was quite the switch for them to have to deal with.
I shan't say anything about disappointed parents, because I've had to live with mine for long enough. And what about yourself, Callum? What was your route?
Yes, so I much like Auden, am a Shropshire lad. I come from a small market town called Ludlow, which is just...
Know it well, lovely river.
I know, yeah. Great castle and a lovely market. So I went to... So the acting kind of bug, I suppose, bit me when it was about year 10 at high school. And we were doing a school play, the first kind of school play that the school had done in a while, as I understand it, and it was Ghostbusters the musical, and it was originally an originally written iteration of Ghostbusters the musical. It wasn't anything like the film. We were the Shropshire branch of Ghostbusters, and I remember going into that audition. It was a musical audition. I had to sing a song. In my infinite wisdom, I sang an Ollie Murs song, which I will not do a rendition of now. I know, disappointing, but I might just sort of implode from the embarrassment. It was mortifying. I remember watching my drama teacher sit there, trying to obscure a really big, like, silly grin on his face, because I was, it was a bit embarrassing. But I ended up being one of the Ghostbusters. And what I found really funny is, like, all of the main characters in the show, they got their own song, apart from me, which, frankly, didn't mind. I was just the comic relief. And so from there, it just kind of sort of built on. And then I'd say, I started to take acting seriously career-wise around sixth form. Because, I'm a big fan of Doctor Who. I've been a big fan of Doctor Who for a long time. And I always, I watched it a lot and still do. But when I was younger, there came a point where I stopped being like, I wonder what sort of the Doctor's going to get up to next week and stuff like that. And there came a point where I was like, hang on a minute, these are people and this is a job and that's incredible and I want that job. So, I did sixth form, and then I thought about auditioning for drama school, but a lot of my friends were auditioning for drama school straight out of sixth form, and they were getting nowhere. And I had sort of, quite a low opinion of myself as an actor at that point, and I was like, gosh, if they're not even getting anywhere, what hope do I have? So I went to university, went to Royal Holloway, studied drama and theatre studies there, did a lot of society stuff, a lot of improv. Shout out to the Holloway players, if you're listening.
They will be.
Yeah. And so, did that. And then recently, a year and a half ago, graduated from East 15, did the MA in acting there under Andrea Brooks. A fantastic woman, fantastic course. And now I've been living in London for about a year and a half ever since. And that's sort of me, really, in a nutshell. Yeah.
And have you been keeping busy? Has everyone been keeping busy? That's the other thing that people always talk to you about when you're an actor.
Yes. Well, I mean, it's sort of that's part of the game, isn't it? I mean, I do a lot of classes and other such things, and I'm a playwright myself, so I write bits and bobs, and I find that how just kind of keeping the creative juices, be it sort of honing the craft or making something myself to sort of put on, is sort of helpful and nourishing. And I think it's all a matter of keeping yourself occupied so you don't go absolutely mental, which I have been on the brink of a couple of times. But
how are you finding playing an elevated lord and a monster?
Well, no, it's been great. It's been really, really good. I think Byron is. I mean, I couldn't have asked for a better role to play, quite frankly. As a queer man myself, I think the honour of embodying such an interesting, complex queer figure from history is a real privilege. And also briefly dipping my toe into the monster is just, I mean, it's great fun, isn't it? Like I love, moving my body in weird ways and sort of, putting a voice on and stuff like that. That's I don't know. There's something kind of childlike in the joy of it. Yeah.
And of course, the real monster, the real Frankenstein, a lot of us tend to think of the bolt through the neck and the real monster, in a sense, is not that at all, is he? He's a sentient being who teaches himself to read and write. She's created this creature that's quite. Hopefully, it's quite moving.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the creature. Didn't ask to be born. Sort of going back to what sort of Teryn was saying about childhood and sort of the themes of that in the book and stuff like that. And here's this wonderful this miracle because Victor Frankenstein, he performs a miracle. He brings something dead to life, and then he shuns it. This thing of beauty, and it like any child that is abandoned by its parent, it's sad, it's sad. It lashes out, and
Victor creates the evil himself, rather than blaming it on the creature. Is this kind of, which is what I really find interesting about the creature, because you could have him as very 2D and just say he's this evil person who commits these atrocious acts towards the end of the book. But no, we actually see his path of him turning into that. We see that kind of path into this this learned cruelty and evilness, which I think is so much more interesting, because So with so many characters, they're not just bad people. They have a whole depth to their personality, which is really interesting from an acting perspective to be able to look at, and from an audience perspective.
Yeah, and I suppose there's that Homeric quote, isn't it? Give me the child till he's 7 and I'll give you the man.
Yes.
And that's sort of hugely amplified here. But so
it does make me think of, there's a line that Mary has that she says to Percy, which is, we are isolated creatures, but we are perhaps what society has made us. And I do think that also applies to the creature. So, the creature starts off as being good and wanting, companionship and love and connection. And it's because of how society reacts to the creature that causes him to become monstrous, because of all of these feelings of isolation and it's like with any child. Like, someone tells you that you are monstrous enough and you believe them, or a child will take the path of least resistance. So if everyone says, oh, they're a real problem child in school, they're a troublemaker, well, it becomes easier to continue to play the troublemaker than to try and prove them wrong. And so I think that's the heartbreak of it, and you feel quite sympathetic toward the creature and quite heartbroken, I think, at the end. And certainly Mary, who's looking at the creature as sort of a metaphor stand-in for her own children who she can't keep alive, I think is a really moving moment in the piece.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, you're looking forward to the Edinburgh Festival?
Yes.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much for your time. That's all we've got time for. If you want to suss out, come and see The Birth of Frankenstein. It is actually this week at the Tabard Theatre in London, in Birmingham. Then it's at the Edinburgh Festival in Pleasance Courtyard in the Cellar. Very appropriate named venue, I think, there. The Cellar in the Pleasance Courtyard for the Edinburgh Festival. And then at the end of August, it will be in Birmingham at the Billesley Pub. Oh, in South Birmingham. If you'd like to know any more, then check out mavericktheatrecompany.com. I think all the details are on there. Maverick Theatre, www. I don't need to say that, do I? mavericktheatrecompany.com. And if you'd like to get in touch, as always, it's radio@mavericktheatre.co.uk. If you're involved in anything, if you're writing anything, or you've got a song out there, just let me know. And I shall see you next time. This is Literary London on bohemianbritain.com and also on Resonance 104.4 FM.